She paused at the hallway mirror, 1956, smoothing her circle skirt before the door, because every girl her age knew the rules nobody ever printed. 25 of them, and she was about to break one. To understand those rules, you have to picture the world they grew up inside. Post-war America was booming, and for the first time teenagers had their own money, their own music, and their own magazines telling them exactly how to look. By 1956, there were roughly 13 million teens in the country, and they spent around $9 billion a year. They never wrote the rules down, but every girl knew. This is what they knew. Rule number 1 began at the feet. Saddle shoes were not a fashion accident. They were a uniform with unwritten grammar. The white had to be chalked bright, the dark saddle polished, and the laces never frayed. A scuffed pair told the whole school you did not care, and caring was the entire point. Girls kept a little tin of polish in their lockers and touched them up between classes, because the floor of a gymnasium showed everything. And the socks above them mattered just as much. Bobby socks were folded, never bunched, turned down in a neat, even cuff that sat at exactly the right height on the ankle. Too high looked childish, too low looked sloppy. Girls learned to fold them so the cuff stayed crisp through a whole day of walking. It sounds like nothing, but the difference between a careful fold and a careless one was the difference between belonging and standing out for the wrong reason. Then came the skirt, and here the rule was nearly mathematical. The hemline of a proper full skirt fell to mid-calf or just below the knee, and a girl checked it by kneeling. If the hem touched the floor when she knelt, the length was right. Mothers measured it with a yardstick before church and before the school day. Too short, and you were called fast. Too long, and you looked like your grandmother. The acceptable window was only a few inches wide. Underneath that skirt lived a secret weapon, and rule number 3 was that the silhouette came from what you could not see. The crinoline petticoat gave the skirt its bell shape, and a stylish girl owned several stacked together. They were stiffened with sugar water and starch, hung to dry, and stored carefully so they kept their lift. A flat skirt meant a flat petticoat, and a flat petticoat meant you had not prepared. There is a whole world hiding in what nobody said out loud. Rule 4 was about the cardigan, worn a very particular way. A girl draped it over her shoulders and fastened only the top button, letting it hang like a small cape. Or she wore it buttoned all the way up and backward, the buttons running down her spine, a look that swept the country in the middle of the decade. The sweater set, a matching shell and cardigan, was the safest, most respectable choice a teenage girl could make. Color was its own quiet language, and Rule 5 governed it strictly. Soft pastels and clean primaries were for daytime, and a girl learned which shades flattered her without ever reading it in a book. Pink and powder blue and mint were everywhere, but they were matched, never clashed. A red sweater meant red lips, and never both red and orange in the same outfit. Coordinating your colors was not vanity, it was a sign you respected yourself and the people who would see you. Rule 6 was the belt, cinched at the natural waist and never an inch lower. The whole shape of 50s style depended on a defined waistline, the hourglass that Dior had launched with the new look back in 1947. A wide belt over a full skirt drew the eye exactly where the era wanted it. Girls would tighten that belt one notch past comfortable because the silhouette mattered more than the breadth. The waist was the headline of the whole outfit. Now to the hair, and Rule 7 was that you were never truly finished until your hair was set. The night before mattered as much as the morning. Girls rolled their hair onto curlers or pinned it into tight pin curls, slept on the bumps, and brushed it out at dawn into soft waves. A ponytail had to be smooth and high, tied with a scarf that matched the outfit. Frizz was the enemy, and humidity was a personal insult. Rule 8 ran the headscarf and the kerchief. Tied under the chin for a windy walk, knotted at the nape for a casual look, or folded into a thin band across the crown, the scarf did real work. It protected a fresh set from the weather and added a flash of color on a plain day. A girl owned a small drawer of them, silk for Sunday, and cotton for school. They never wrote it down, but every girl knew which knot meant which occasion. Rule 9 was lipstick, and it was the one cosmetic a teenage girl could wear without scandal. A soft pink or a careful red, blotted once on a tissue, was considered grown-up but still proper. Heavy makeup was forbidden, and a face that looked painted got you talked about. Mascara was rare, eyeshadow rarer. The look was clean skin, a touch of powder, and one perfect mouth. By 1960, Americans were spending billions a year on cosmetics, and much of the habit started at exactly this age. Rule 10 covered the gloves, which a young woman wore far more often than we imagine today. Short white cotton gloves for church and shopping, longer ones for a dance, and a pair tucked in the purse for emergencies. Gloves meant you took the occasion seriously, and a bare hand at a formal event read as careless. They were washed by hand and laid flat to dry. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, and the glove was part of it. Rule 11 was the handbag, and it was never large. A small structured purse, often matching the shoes, held only what was needed: a comb, a compact, a handkerchief, and a little money. Matching your bag to your footwear was the mark of a girl who had thought her outfit through. A teenager who carried a sloppy, oversized bag looked like she was running away from home. The smaller and tidier, the more grown up. Rule 12 was the most invisible of all, the foundation garments. Beneath every neat outfit was a girdle or a long line bra doing quiet structural work, smoothing the line so the clothes fell exactly right. Mothers handed this knowledge down without a single written instruction. A teenager learned that the smooth silhouette of the magazines was never just the dress. It was everything underneath, pressed and pinned and held in place. It vanished, but it worked, at least as the look the whole era was built around. Rule 13 handled the blue jeans, and the rule was that a girl rolled the cuffs. Denim was a casual rebellion borrowed from boys, worn on weekends and never to school, where dress codes still ruled. The cuffs were turned up in a thick, neat band, often paired with a tucked button-down shirt and those same saddle shoes. Jeans signaled fun, not defiance, as long as they were clean and the cuffs were even. There is a whole world hiding in what nobody said out loud. Rule 14 was the poodle skirt, but the truth is gentler than the legend. The felt circle skirt with an applique design was a genuine fad, though not every girl owned one, and the designs ranged far beyond poodles. They were heavy wool felt, cut from a full circle, and they swung beautifully on the dance floor. A girl who had one saved it for sock hops and special nights. The image survived because it captured something real about how those skirts moved. Rule 15 lived at the collar, and it was the Peter Pan, small and rounded and crisp. A flat white collar on a blouse or dress signaled youth and propriety at once, and girls kept theirs spotless. A grayed or wilted collar undid the whole outfit. Some girls owned detachable collars they could button onto a plain dress to freshen it for a second wearing, stretching a small wardrobe across a long week without anyone noticing. Rule 16 was that everything was ironed, and ironing was a daily ritual, not an occasional chore. A wrinkle was read as a character flaw, proof that a girl had not planned ahead. Cotton blouses were dampened and pressed, pleats set with care, and collars given extra attention. The whole house often smelled of warm starch on a Sunday evening. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, and it was that a pressed shirt changed how the world looked at you. Rule 17 was the boyfriend's ring or letter sweater, the loudest unspoken signal of all. A girl going steady wore his class ring on a chain around her neck or wrapped in yarn to fit her finger, or his oversized Letterman sweater swallowing her frame. Everyone read it instantly. It announced that she was taken without a single word, and removing it announced the opposite. The whole social map of a high school could be read off what girls wore around their necks. Rule 18 governed the eyebrows and the face, and the standard was natural and groomed, never dramatic. Eyebrows were tidied but kept full, the soft arch of the early 50s replacing the thin pencil lines of earlier decades. A teenage girl was expected to look fresh, like she had simply woken up lovely, even though the freshness took real work at the mirror. The effort was supposed to be invisible. That invisibility was the whole skill. Rule 19 was the seamed stockings, worn for dressier days and inspected constantly. The seam running up the back of the leg had to be perfectly straight, and a crooked seam was a small disaster. Girls checked each other before walking into a dance, the way friends straighten a tie today. Nylon stockings had been precious during the war and were still treated with care, mended rather than tossed, rolled gently to avoid a run that could ruin an evening. Rule 20 was simple to say and hard to live, that an outfit was never complete without a final check. Before she left the house, a girl stood at the full-length mirror and ran through the whole picture: shoes, hem, waist, collar, hair, and face. Mothers often did the inspection, sending a daughter back upstairs over a single loose thread. Leaving the house unfinished was nearly unthinkable. They never wrote it down, but every girl knew the door was a kind of stage. Rule 21 was the rolled-up shirt sleeve, a small casual code among the boys that the girls read fluently. A boy with his sleeves cuffed twice and a comb in his back pocket was sending a message, and the girls knew which crowd he ran with before he opened his mouth. Style was a sorting system. In a few seconds of looking, a teenager could place almost anyone, and everyone knew they were being read in return. Rule 22 was the bobby pin economy, because almost every hairstyle depended on them. A girl kept dozens, scattered in a dish on the vanity, pinned to the inside of a collar, tucked behind an ear for emergencies. They held a set in place, tamed a stray wave, and saved a wind-blown style before class. Losing them was constant, so they were hoarded. It is a tiny thing, but the whole architecture of 50s hair rested on a handful of bent metal pins. Rule 23 was the Sunday best, a wardrobe held separate from everything else. The good dress, the good gloves, the good shoes, all reserved and protected, worn for church and serious occasions, and nothing less. A girl did not wear her Sunday clothes to school or to play, and the line between everyday and special was firm. Dressing up meant something precisely because it was rare. That separation taught a respect for clothing that has nearly disappeared. Rule 24 was that you cared for clothes to make them last, because a wardrobe was small and money was watched. Hems were let down as a girl grew, seams taken in or out, buttons replaced from a tin kept for that purpose. A single good skirt might serve 3 years with careful tending. Mending was not shameful. It was ordinary skill, taught from mother to daughter at the kitchen table. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, and thrift was a quiet part of it. Rule 25, the last and the quietest, was that you dressed for the room you were entering, not the room you were in. A girl thought ahead to where she was going, and who would be there, and she matched herself to it. Dressing was an act of respect for other people, a way of saying she had considered them. That single idea sat underneath all 24 rules before it. The attic remembers, even when we forget. Now think about where these rules came from, because they did not fall from the sky. Teen magazines like 17, launched in 1944, sold girls a vision and the products to reach it. Hollywood gave them faces to copy, from the soft glamour of the screen to the wholesome girl next door. Department stores built whole floors for the junior shopper. The rules felt like common sense, but they were taught, page by page and window by window. The high school itself enforced half of these rules without ever printing them. Dress codes banned jeans and shorts for girls, required skirts of a certain length, and sent home anyone who pushed too far. A dean of girls patrolled the halls with an eye for hemlines. The rules in the magazine and the rules in the principal's office met in the middle, and a teenager lived inside both at once, learning to read the narrow path between them. Consider the cost of all this, because looking right was not free. A good wool circle skirt could run $8 to $12, real money when a movie ticket cost a quarter. Saddle shoes, sweaters, stockings, and a Sunday dress added up fast. Many girls earned the difference babysitting or working a soda counter, saving for weeks to buy one approved item. The rules carried a price, and meeting it was part of the achievement that nobody mentioned aloud. And yet a small wardrobe stretched remarkably far, which was a skill in itself. A clever girl owned a handful of pieces and recombined them, a skirt with 3 different sweaters, a dress dressed up with a collar or down with a cardigan. The goal was to never look like you wore the same thing twice in a week, achieved not with closets full of clothes, but with planning. They never wrote it down, but every girl knew how to make 4 outfits look like 10. The dances were where every rule came together at once. At the sock hop, shoes came off so the gym floor would not scuff, and girls danced in their bobby socks under streamers and a record player. This was the moment the circle skirt earned its place, flaring out on a fast number. Every choice made all week, the set hair, the pressed blouse, the careful waist, was on display for a few hours under the lights. Summer had its own quiet rule book, softer, but still firm. Pedal pushers and Bermuda shorts were acceptable for casual days, worn just below the knee, paired with a sleeveless blouse and flat shoes. A girl still did not wear shorts downtown or to anyone's home for a visit. The seasons changed the fabrics and the lengths, but the underlying idea held all year. There was always a right thing to wear, and a girl was expected to know it. Winter brought the wool and the layering, and a new set of unspoken standards. A good coat was an investment, often the single most expensive item a girl owned, chosen to last several seasons and to look right over a full skirt. A headscarf or a small hat kept the set hair from collapsing in the snow. Mittens matched, boots were practical but tidy, and even bundled against the cold, the silhouette underneath still mattered. There was a strict line, too, between day clothes and evening clothes that nobody had to explain. The crisp cottons and sensible shoes of the school day gave way at night to softer fabrics, a touch of shine, a special pair of shoes kept just for dances. A girl who wore her daytime saddle shoes to a formal looked out of place, and one who wore party shoes to class looked like she was trying too hard. Each had its time. Jewelry followed rule after rule, all of them about restraint. A single strand of pearls, real or the dime store kind, was the safest choice for almost any occasion. Small earrings, a delicate bracelet, and never too much at once. Charm bracelets were popular among the younger girls, each charm a tiny story collected over years. The principle was the same as everywhere else, that a little done well beat a lot done loud. Consider how fast a girl learned to read others, because style was a constant, quiet conversation. In the time it took to walk past someone in the hall, a teenager registered the cut of the skirt, the state of the shoes, the freshness of the collar, and filed it all away. Nobody said any of it aloud, and nobody had to. There is a whole world hiding in what nobody said out loud, and the high school hallway was full of it. The cost of breaking a rule was real, and every girl understood it. A skirt too short, a face too painted, or a sweater too tight could earn a reputation in a single afternoon, and reputations were sticky in a small town. The rules were a kind of armor as much as a cage, a way to move through the world without drawing the wrong kind of attention. Following them was not only about looking nice, it was about being safe from gossip. But there were rule breakers, and they mattered. As the decade wore on, some girls pushed the hems shorter, the jeans tighter, the makeup bolder, taking cues from new movies and a new kind of music. They were the ones the magazines warned about, and the ones their younger sisters secretly admired. Every set of rules creates the people who test them, and the careful style of the 50s was already carrying the seeds of the change that came next. Look closer at the saddle shoe, because its story tells you something. It had started years earlier as a sporty shoe, and by the 50s it belonged entirely to the young. Brands sold them by the millions, and the white and dark pairing became shorthand for an entire generation. The shoe outlived the rules around it, surviving in costume and memory long after the Polish tin disappeared from the locker. It vanished from daily life, but it never quite left the imagination. The petticoat had a secret history of its own. At the height of the fad, a single skirt might be held out by 3 or 4 crinolines stacked together, so much net that a girl could barely fit through a car door. Schools occasionally complained that the skirts took up too much space in the aisles. The look was so extreme that it could only last a few years, but while it reigned, the wider the better was the unspoken law. Think about the mothers in all of this, the ones doing the teaching. A woman who had come of age in the lean years of the Depression and the war passed down a code shaped by scarcity and care. She inspected hems and straightened collars not to be harsh, but because she believed it mattered, that presenting yourself well was a form of self-respect she had learned the hard way. The rules were love, expressed in starch and thread. Now, picture the catalog, the great quiet teacher of American style. Mail order books arrived thick with pages of junior fashion, and a girl in a small town learned the rules from the same pages as a girl in a city. The catalog standardized the look across the whole country, so a teenager in rural Kansas and one in suburban New Jersey wore nearly the same skirt. It was a shared language, printed and mailed, that bound a generation together. There was a rule about the neckline that we should not skip. For a teenager, modest was the only acceptable cut, a high round neck or a small collar, with anything lower reserved for grown women and special evenings, and even then only just. A blouse buttoned to the throat at school, loosened by one button at most for a party. The neckline marked the careful line between girl and woman, a line the whole culture watched. Consider the cat eye glasses, because even eyewear had its code. For the girls who needed them, the upswept frame turned a necessity into a statement, available in colors to match an outfit and decorated at the corners. A pair of glasses was not something to hide, but something to coordinate, chosen as carefully as shoes. The same instinct ran through everything, the belief that nothing a girl wore was beneath attention, that every detail was a chance to do it right.
The hair set deserves a second look, because the work behind it was enormous. A girl might spend an hour pinning curls before bed, sleep uncomfortably on the bumps, and rise early to brush and shape the result. On a humid day, the whole effort could collapse by lunchtime, and a scarf was the only rescue. The smooth, controlled hairstyles of the magazines hid hours of labor. The effort was the rule, even when it never showed.
There was an unspoken rule about being matched from head to toe, the total look. Shoes to belt to bag to scarf, a thread of color or theme was meant to run through the whole outfit, tying it into a single intentional picture. A girl who matched well looked finished, and finished was the highest compliment. The eye was trained to notice when one element fell out of step, and so a girl trained herself to make every piece agree. Consider posture, which was almost a garment in itself. Girls were taught to stand straight, shoulders back, to walk smoothly and sit with knees together, and good posture made even a plain dress look elegant. Some schools held charm classes that drilled it. The clothing of the era assumed a certain carriage. The cinched waist and structured shape only worked on a body held upright. How a girl carried the outfit was as much a rule as the outfit itself. There was a rule about hats, fading by the late 50s but still alive for formal days. A small hat or a fascinator finished a Sunday outfit, pinned over the set hair, removed indoors with care. Younger girls wore them less than their mothers, and this was one of the rules visibly loosening as the decade closed. Watching the hat decline tells you the whole code was already softening, one habit at a time, even before anyone noticed. Think about the role of imitation, because the rules spread by copying. A new girl with a fresh look could shift the whole school in a season, and a popular girl's choices rippled outward fast. Magazines named the trends, but the real enforcement happened girl to girl, in who copied whom. To follow the rules was partly to follow each other, a constant gentle pressure to stay in step. Nobody printed it, but everybody felt the pull. Consider the apron, which a teenage girl still wore at home without a second thought. Helping in the kitchen meant tying one on to protect the good clothes underneath, a habit so ordinary it never felt like a rule. The apron protected the careful outfit and signaled that a girl was useful, a quality the era prized in equal measure with looking nice. The two ideas lived together, that a girl should be both pretty and capable. There was a rule about new versus worn, and it was subtle. Clothes were meant to look cared for but not brand new, broken in just enough to seem natural, never stiff and never ragged. A too-new outfit could look like showing off, and a worn one like neglect. The sweet spot was a garment that looked loved and well kept, which took as much judgment as money. Knowing where that line sat was part of the unspoken education. Now, look at how the decade ended, because the rules did not vanish all at once. Through the late 50s, the hems crept, the silhouettes loosened, and a younger, freer style began to push in from the edges. The full skirt and the cinched waist gave way slowly to simpler shapes. The careful, layered look that had ruled the early years was loosening its grip, and a teenager in 1959 dressed with noticeably less ceremony than her older sister had in 1953. Then the 60s arrived and swept much of it away. The structured silhouette, the gloves, the hats, the seamed stockings, all of it gave ground to a new freedom and a new informality within a single decade. The girl who had measured her hem by kneeling watched her own daughter wear something she could never have worn to school. The change was fast, and a whole intricate code slipped out of daily life almost before anyone could write it down. It is worth asking what was lost when the rules went. Some of it was a cage worth opening, a narrowness that punished girls for small things and watched them too closely. But some of it was a craft, a daily attention to detail, and a respect for clothing and occasion that has grown rare. The truth sits in the middle, neither a golden age nor a dark one, just a different way of moving through the world. Picture a girl on a Friday afternoon, the whole week of rules behind her, walking home from school in the autumn light. Her shoes are clean, her hem is right, her hair held its set through the day, and she carries the small, invisible pride of having done it well. No one praised her for it, and no one had to. The reward was internal, the quiet satisfaction of meeting a standard she had set for herself. Think about how much skill hid inside these ordinary habits. To set hair, press a blouse, fold a sock, straighten a seam, and coordinate a whole look took knowledge passed hand to hand across generations. None of it appeared on a report card, yet a 15-year-old in 1955 commanded a small craft of self-presentation that no class taught and no test measured. They never wrote it down, but every girl knew, and the knowing was its own kind of education. Consider how these rules shaped friendships, too. Getting ready together was a ritual, girls gathering before a dance to set each other's hair, straighten each other's seams, and judge each other's choices with honesty only friends can give. The rules were a shared project, a thing done in company. The hours spent preparing were as much a part of the fun as the dance itself, and the closeness built over hairpins and hemlines lasted long after the music stopped. There is a reason these images still move us. The careful girl at the mirror, the full skirt on the dance floor, the white gloves on the pew, they carry a tenderness that survives the decades. We look back not because the past was perfect, but because it was attentive, because someone cared enough to fold the sock and press the collar. The attic remembers, even when we forget, and these small rituals are exactly the kind of thing it keeps. Think about how many of these rules quietly persist. The instinct to dress for the occasion, to look cared for, to match your accessories, to check the mirror before the door, all of it lingers in small ways even now. The 50s teenager would recognize the impulse, even if she would be baffled by the clothes. Some of what she knew did not vanish at all. It simply went underground, surfacing whenever we want to look our best. Consider the photographs that survive in attic boxes across the country. A black and white snapshot of a girl in her circle skirt, squinting in the sun on a front lawn, captures every rule at once without naming one. These pictures are the only record many families have of how a generation actually dressed and stood and smiled. They are documents as much as keepsakes, the closest thing we have to the unwritten rule book itself. There was a rule about handkerchiefs that we have almost entirely forgotten. A girl carried a clean, pressed handkerchief, often with an embroidered corner or a bit of lace, tucked into a sleeve or a purse. It was practical and pretty at once, a small touch of personality in an outfit otherwise built on conformity. Some were hand-stitched as gifts and kept for years. It vanished from daily life, but it carried a quiet grace that is hard to replace. Consider the slip, the thin layer worn under a dress that almost no one thinks of now. It kept a dress hanging smoothly, prevented it from clinging, and added a layer of modesty taken for granted at the time. A girl owned several, in white and a few pale colors, and a hem of lace peeking out by accident was a small embarrassment to be tucked away. It was a humble garment, but it did real work, and it slipped quietly out of the wardrobe. Think about how the rules gave a kind of confidence, strange as that sounds. When a girl knew exactly what was expected and how to meet it, getting dressed was a solved problem rather than an anxiety. The narrow path was confining, but it was also clear, and clarity has its own comfort. There was no agonizing over 1,000 options, only the steady work of doing the known thing well. For many, that certainty was a relief, not a burden. Consider what the boys' rules tell us by contrast. While the girls navigated dozens of fine distinctions, a boys' code was simpler: the clean shirt, the pressed slacks, the polished shoes, the controlled hair. The very fact that girls carried a heavier rulebook says something about how closely they were watched and how much was read into their choices. The asymmetry was itself an unwritten rule, one of the largest hiding in plain sight across the whole decade. Picture the department store, the cathedral of all these rules. A girl entered the junior section to find everything arranged to teach her: mannequins styled head to toe, saleswomen ready to advise, mirrors everywhere. The store sold not just clothes, but the entire system of how to wear them. A first trip there with a mother was a rite of passage, the moment a girl began assembling her own version of the code she would carry for years. Consider how regional the rules could be beneath the national surface. A girl in a warm southern town and one in a cold northern city followed the same magazine but adapted it to weather, church custom, and local taste. The catalog standardized the look, but every place bent it a little. Underneath the shared code ran 1,000 small variations, the proof that real people, not just advertisements, were living inside these rules every single day. Think about the moment a daughter outgrew the rules her mother taught. There came a day, often in the early 60s, when a girl chose something her mother would never have approved, and the unwritten code began passing out of force. It was not always a fight, sometimes just a quiet drift, a hem an inch shorter than allowed, a face a shade bolder. In those small choices, a whole way of life was gently set down and left behind. Consider the costume that survives at every 50s-themed party today. The poodle skirt, the ponytail, the saddle shoes, all stitched together into a friendly caricature of a far more detailed reality. The real code had 25 rules and 1,000 subtleties, but memory keeps only the highlights. That is how eras are remembered, flattened into a few bright symbols, while the careful texture of daily life fades. The attic remembers the texture, even when the party only keeps the costume. Think about why a channel like this one bothers to count them out. These rules were never important enough for the history books, too small, too daily, too feminine to be recorded, and so they slip away with the last people who lived them, unless someone stops to gather them up. There is a whole world hiding in what nobody said out loud, and it deserves better than to vanish unremarked. That is the whole reason for the digging. So picture her one last time, the girl at the hallway mirror in 1956, smoothing her skirt before the door. She is carrying 25 rules nobody ever printed, and she does not think of them as rules at all, just as the way things are done. Within a decade, most of them will be gone, and within 2, they will be a costume. But for now, in the autumn light, she is simply finished and ready and entirely of her time. When you look back at all 25, the lesson is not that we should bring the rules back exactly as they were. It is that there was real intention in how a generation of girls presented themselves, a care and a craft worth understanding before it disappears completely. Your grandmother knew something they stopped teaching, and a little of it is worth carrying forward, not as a cage, but as a reminder that small things, done with attention, still matter. If this brought back a memory or taught you something your grandmother never got to explain, stay with me here at the attic, where we rescue these forgotten things before they slip away for good. Tell me in the comments which of these 25 rules you remember, or which one surprised you most. Subscribe so the next box we open finds its way to you, and I will see you again soon with another story the past almost forgot.